Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the controlling dinosaur who thinks he owns everyone around him. The words hit me like a truck. There I was, standing in my own backyard at my daughter's second wedding anniversary party, wearing my best suit, watching my son-in-law Victor Caldwell wave his champagne glass at me while his whole family laughed. Let me back up and tell you who I am. My name's Gerald Patterson. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent the last 30 years building riverside development properties, from nothing into one of Chicago's biggest property development companies. After my wife Dorothy died 5 years back, my daughter Lisa became everything to me, but standing there listening to Victor mock me in front of 50 guests at the party I'd paid $8,000 for, I realized I didn't know this guy at all. 2 hours earlier, I'd been setting up tables in my backyard, proud as any dad could be. Lisa looked beautiful in her summer dress, the same blue her mom used to love. "Thanks for hosting this, Dad," she said. Though she wouldn't look me in the eye. Victor wanted the country club, but this feels more personal. I'd paid for everything. Not that I was counting. I watched Lisa fidget with her wedding ring, the one that supposedly cost Victor $12,000. I'd always wondered how he afforded it on what he claimed to make. Mom would have loved this, I told her, straightening one of the white tablecloths. 2 years married already. Goes by fast. But standing there in my own yard, listening to my daughter's husband trash me publicly, I realized time hadn't been going by fast. It'd been crawling while someone was slowly destroying everything I'd built. The Caldwell family owned investment firms across the Midwest. Victor's dad, Carl Caldwell, ran a financial advisory business worth millions. What I didn't know was that their success was built on other people's money, specifically money stolen from clients like me. "Mr. Patterson," Carl stammered after Victor's little toast, his champagne shaking in his hand. "I had no idea Victor felt that way about your involvement in their marriage." Involvement in what? Lisa's voice got sharp. She looked between us, her smile disappearing. "That your father's Gerald Patterson," Victor said, with this smirk. "The Gerald Patterson who calls my office 3 times a week to check on his investments." Silence spread across the party like someone had turned off the music. Nancy Caldwell, Victor's mom, stepped forward with one of those fake smiles rich women perfect at charity events. "Oh my, what a coincidence. You must be one of Victor's satisfied clients." "Not satisfied," I said, staying calm while watching Victor's face go pale. "Concerned. Real concerned about some things that don't add up." Truth was, I'd been looking at my investment statements for weeks, trying to figure out why my returns looked nothing like what Victor promised. Riverside Development was doing well enough that I'd invested $180,000 with Victor's firm over the past 2 years, trusting him because he was family. Victor's laugh died completely. "Problems? Dad, what are you talking about? The quarterly reports that don't match the market performance you claimed. The investment partnerships that seem to exist only on paper. The wire transfers to accounts I never heard of." Lisa appeared next to me, finally sensing something was wrong. "Dad, is everything okay?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised alone after losing her mother, who I'd worked 60-hour weeks to put through business school, who I'd sacrificed everything for, and realized she was standing closer to her husband than to me. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart," I said, patting her arm, "just getting better acquainted with your husband's business practices." Victor cleared his throat, trying to recover. "Mr. Patterson, maybe we could meet next week. I'd be happy to clear up any confusion about your portfolio." Monday morning, I cut him off. 9 a.m. sharp. My office. I turned to Lisa with my warmest smile. "Congratulations on your anniversary, honey. I'm sure we'll be talking about your future real soon." As I walked away, I heard Victor hiss to his mother, "Why didn't you tell me he was asking questions?" "We didn't know," Nancy whispered back, panicking. "You said he was just some trusting old man." "Just some trusting old man." Those words followed me to my home office, where I locked the door and stared at my computer screen. On it were bank statements, investment reports, and wire transfer records that told a very different story than what Victor had been showing me. In the past 2 years, while Victor was telling me my investments were earning 11% annually, the actual accounts showed transfers totaling $150,000 to overseas accounts I'd never heard of. Money that should have been growing my retirement fund had been systematically stolen by the man who called me dad at family dinners. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Meeting with the forensic accountant moved to Tuesday. He'll have preliminary findings Monday." I smiled at my reflection in the dark window and started planning my next move. Monday was going to be real educational for Victor Caldwell. The path to that humiliating moment started 8 months earlier, when I made the mistake of trusting family over business sense. Lisa had called on a Tuesday night, her voice carrying that tone that meant she needed something expensive. "Dad, Victor's firm is expanding their services. He thinks you'd be perfect for their premium investment program. I'd been reviewing development contracts in my home office, but I set everything aside. My son-in-law wanted to help grow my money. Despite everything else, the father and me wanted to support their marriage. What kind of program, honey? High-yield investments, international partnerships, stuff regular financial advisors can't access. Victor says with your money, you could see returns of 10 to 12% annually. 10 to 12%. I remember thinking it sounded good, but not too good to be true. Victor had his Series 7 license, an MBA from Northwestern, and most importantly, he was married to my daughter. Tell me more about these partnerships. For the next hour, Lisa described Victor's investment strategy, international real estate ventures, exclusive client opportunities. What she didn't mention was that none of it actually existed. That conversation led to my first investment of $60,000. Then another $70,000 6 months later when Victor showed me fake quarterly reports claiming 12% returns. Then a final $50,000 when he convinced me to diversify into his European Development Fund, a $180,000 total. Money that should have secured my retirement had instead financed Victor's lifestyle and his family's business ventures. But the real betrayal wasn't the theft. It was how Victor poisoned Lisa against me to cover his tracks. The thing is, Dad, Lisa had said during a family dinner last month, Victor thinks you have trouble letting go of control. He says you call his office constantly, questioning every investment decision. I poured her more wine, noticing how she avoided eye contact. After raising her alone, I knew all her tells, what kind of control issues. Well, you do ask lots of questions about the investments. Victor says most clients trust their advisor's expertise. I waited. In business, silence is often your most powerful tool. He thinks maybe you don't trust his judgment because he's younger than your usual business partners. And what do you think? I think Victor knows what he's doing. His family's been in finance for 30 years. Maybe you could try being more supportive of our decisions, not his decisions, but theirs as a couple. Victor had successfully convinced my daughter that my reasonable questions about my own money were actually me trying to control their marriage. Have you talked to Victor about showing me more detailed reports? Dad, you don't understand. His clients include Fortune 500 companies. He's not used to hand-holding individual investors. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter had no idea that her husband was stealing from the man who'd paid for her wedding, her car, and the down payment on their house. And you feel I'm being unreasonable by wanting transparency about my investments? I want you to trust the man I married, she said simply. Those 7 words broke my heart. I'd raised this girl to be smart, independent, and careful with money. How had I failed so completely that she couldn't see the red flags in her husband's behavior? Lisa, if he's legitimate, detailed reports should be easy to provide. Dad, please, I'm not asking you to stop investing. Just stop micromanaging Victor's every decision. How much are we talking about for his expansion fund? Maybe another $40,000. You can afford it, right? The business is doing well, $40,000. The number sat between us like an unwelcome dinner guest. Lisa, that's more money than most people make in a year. I know, but you've always said family comes first, and after mom's insurance. She trailed off, realizing how that sounded. My wife's death had left me financially comfortable, but hearing my daughter calculate the value of her mother's life so casually made me sick. Let me think about it, I said. That night, I sat in Dorothy's study, looking at her photograph on the desk. We'd built Riverside Development together, starting with a single apartment renovation and growing it into one of Chicago's premier development companies. What would you do? I asked her picture, but I already knew the answer. Dorothy had always been cautious with money, asking hard questions that sometimes annoyed me. The next morning, I called my attorney Michael Torres instead of Victor. Michael, I need you to recommend a forensic accountant. I think I'm being robbed by my son-in-law. Looking back now, standing in that bathroom mirror after being called a controlling dinosaur, I realized that single phone call had been the beginning of my transformation from trusting father-in-law into something far more dangerous. Because by Monday morning, I'd have evidence that Victor Caldwell wasn't just a bad investment advisor. He was a criminal. Monday morning came with Chicago's typical autumn chill, and I dressed for war. Business suit, minimal accessories, the look that had intimidated developers and city planners for 25 years. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into my conference room, where Victor Caldwell sat fidgeting with his phone like a nervous teenager. Mr. Patterson, he stood quickly, extending his hand. Thanks for agreeing to meet so early. Victor, I replied, taking the seat at the head of the table. I think we need to clear something up before we start. I opened my briefcase and removed a folder containing bank statements, wire transfer records, and the preliminary forensic accounting report that had arrived at 6 a.m. As of last Friday, I know exactly where my $180,000 went, and it wasn't into any legitimate investment accounts. Victor's face went through several emotions before settling on barely controlled panic. Mr. Patterson, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Your investments are performing exactly as projected. According to my forensic accountant, my investments performed a disappearing act. $15,000 transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The remaining $30,000 seems to have financed your new lifestyle. I slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of bank records, wire transfer authorizations with forged signatures, and account statements showing the systematic theft of my retirement funds. This is impossible, Victor whispered, but his hands shook as he flipped through the paperwork. The impossible part, I said with a small smile, is that you thought I wouldn't notice. Victor looked up with something approaching horror. What do you want? First, I want my money back, every penny plus interest and penalties. The investments are long-term. I can't just liquidate everything overnight. Victor, there are no investments. There are only theft charges waiting to be filed. I leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You have 48 hours to return $150,000 to my accounts. If you can't manage that, I'll be having a real interesting conversation with the FBI about wire fraud and money laundering. Victor nodded quickly. Of course. I'll liquidate some positions immediately. Second, you're going to call Lisa today and explain exactly what you've been doing with my money. Not because I told you to, but because she deserves to know she married a thief. Lisa doesn't need to know about every detail of our business arrangement. Our business arrangement? Is that what we're calling felony embezzlement now? I stood up, closing my briefcase with a decisive snap. The money transfer happens by Wednesday. Lisa's conversation happens today. And Victor, in the future, when you gather with your family to discuss the controlling old man you married into, you might want to mention that said old man spent 30 years learning how to destroy people who steal from him. Victor's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Have a lovely day, I said cheerfully, and walked out to make my next phone call. By noon, Leonard Hayes, the private investigator I'd hired, had confirmed what the forensic accountant suspected. Victor's investment firm was largely a Ponzi scheme, using new client money to pay returns to earlier investors while siphoning profits to family accounts overseas. At 2 p.m., Michael Torres called with an update from the district attorney's office. Gerald, they want to meet with you tomorrow. If Victor doesn't return the money voluntarily, they're prepared to file criminal charges. The third call came at 40 p.m. from Lisa, her voice shaky with tears. Dad, Victor told me about the money problems. He says there was some kind of market crash that affected your accounts. Lisa, sit down. We need to talk about what your husband actually told you. He said you're threatening to sue him over investment losses that weren't his fault. I closed my eyes, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. Even confronted with evidence of his crimes, Victor was still lying to my daughter. Honey, Victor stole $150,000 from me over the past 2 years. There were no investments, there was no market crash, there was only systematic theft. Silence stretched between us for nearly 10 seconds. That's not possible, she whispered. Victor has clients all over the country. His firm manages millions of dollars. His firm manages other people's money by stealing it and moving it overseas. I have bank records, wire transfers, everything documented. I don't understand. Victor showed me quarterly reports. We celebrated when your portfolio hit $200,000. Those reports were fake, sweetheart. The celebration was for money that never existed. I heard her start crying, and every protective instinct I had wanted to comfort her, but she needed to hear the truth. Lisa, Victor convinced you that I was being controlling and micromanaging when I asked questions about my investments. Do you understand why now? Because you suspected something was wrong, because a father doesn't hand over his retirement fund without asking where it's going. Victor needed you to stop me from looking too closely at what he was doing. Wednesday morning brought the resolution I'd been working toward. Victor appeared at my office at 8 a.m. sharp, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. Mr. Patterson, I've arranged to return $120,000 immediately. The remaining $30,000 will take another week to liquidate. The full $150,000, Victor, plus $15,000 in penalties and investigative costs. Today, I don't have access to that much cash immediately. Then you'll be explaining your cash flow problems to a federal judge. He slumped in the chair across from my desk. My family will lose everything. The business, our house, Lisa's trust fund. Your family should have thought about that before they decided to steal from me. I walked to the window overlooking downtown Chicago, watching the morning traffic crawl through the streets below. But here's what I find most interesting, Victor. You spent 2 years systematically robbing me while convincing my daughter that I was the problem in your marriage. Victor stared at me with growing understanding. So now you get to choose. Prison time for wire fraud and money laundering, or complete financial restitution plus a real honest conversation with Lisa about what kind of man she actually married. By Thursday afternoon, my accounts showed the full $165,000 deposit. Victor had liquidated his car, borrowed against his house, and apparently convinced his parents to wire money from their overseas accounts. The conversation with Lisa happened Friday evening. She appeared at my door carrying a suitcase and wearing the same expression she'd had as a child when she'd broken something valuable. "Dad, can I stay here for a while? Victor and I need some time apart." I led her to the living room where we'd had so many conversations over the years, noting how her eyes took in the family photographs that told the story of her childhood without Victor in any of them. "How you handling everything, sweetheart? I keep thinking about all the times I defended him when you asked questions about the investments. I called you controlling and micromanaging when you were actually trying to protect both of us." She sat down heavily on the sofa where Dorothy used to read bedtime stories. Victor admitted that he's been taking money from several clients, not just you. The FBI is investigating his whole family business. "And how do you feel about your marriage now?" "I feel like I never knew him at all. The man I married was supposedly successful and honest. The real Victor's been lying about everything since our first date." I sat down beside her, this grown woman who was still my little girl, despite everything that had happened. "Lisa, what do you want to do now?" "I want to file for divorce and pretend this never happened. But I can't. Can I? Because Victor might go to prison and that makes me look like either a victim or an accomplice." She was sharper than I'd given her credit for. "Honey, you can't control how this situation looks to other people. You can only control how you respond to learning the truth. What would Mom have done?" I smiled, remembering Dorothy's practical wisdom. "Your mother would have changed the locks, filed the divorce papers, and started over with a clean slate." "But what about the embarrassment? The gossip? Everyone will know I was married to a criminal." "Lisa, listen to me carefully. Being deceived by someone you trust isn't embarrassing. It's human. Staying with someone after you know they're a criminal, that would be embarrassing." Over the weekend, we talked more than we had in years. Lisa told me about the subtle ways Victor had isolated her from friends who asked too many questions, how he'd convinced her that my business success made me arrogant and controlling, how he'd gradually made her dependent on his version of reality. "He was so good at it, Dad, making me feel like I was being disloyal to him whenever I agreed with you about anything. That's what manipulators do, sweetheart. They make you question your own judgment. I should have seen it. The expensive clothes, the fancy restaurants, the way he always had cash but never seemed to work that hard for it. You saw a man who claimed to love you and wanted to believe the best about him. That's not stupidity, Lisa. That's hope." Sunday evening, as we sat in Dorothy's study looking through old photo albums, Lisa asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Dad, how did you know? What made you suspicious when everyone else, including me, thought Victor was perfect?" I closed the album and looked at my daughter's face, so much like her mother's when Dorothy was trying to solve a difficult problem. "Honey, in 30 years of business, I've learned that people who are legitimate don't get defensive when you ask reasonable questions. They welcome scrutiny because they have nothing to hide. But I thought you were being unreasonable. Victor made sure you thought that. Every time I asked about performance reports or fund allocations, he'd tell you I was being controlling instead of just providing the information. That's not how honest advisors behave." Lisa nodded slowly. "He always had an excuse for why he couldn't show you detailed statements. Client confidentiality, proprietary strategies, industry regulations, right? And when someone's stealing your money, they need you to stop asking questions. So they convince the people closest to you that you're the problem." Monday morning brought the final resolution when Michael Torres called with news from the DA's office. "Gerald, Victor Caldwell pled guilty to wire fraud and embezzlement. He'll serve 3 to 5 years, but he cooperated fully with the investigation of his family's business. They recovered over $2 million stolen from various clients, and Lisa's involvement? Clean. She had no knowledge of the crimes, no access to the accounts, no legal exposure." I hung up and walked to my office window, looking down at the Chicago street where people were rushing past with their own complicated lives. 4 months ago, I'd been called a controlling dinosaur at my daughter's anniversary party. Today, I was a man who'd used 30 years of business experience to destroy a criminal enterprise and save my family's financial future. The old Gerald would have quietly absorbed the loss, covered up Victor's crimes, and accepted being called controlling as the price of family peace. But the new Gerald, the one who'd emerged when Victor called him a dinosaur, had different priorities. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Dad, thank you for not giving up when I wouldn't listen. I know now that asking questions isn't controlling, it's caring," I typed back. "That's what fathers do, sweetheart. We protect our families even when they don't want to be protected." That evening, Lisa and I had dinner at the kitchen table where Dorothy used to serve Sunday roasts. It felt like the first normal conversation we'd had in years. "You know what's funny, Dad? Victor used to complain that you treated me like I was still a child. But he's the one who never let me see bank statements or investment reports. He said I wouldn't understand the technical details. And now I realize he was treating me like a child. You were treating me like an adult who deserved to know the truth about her family's finances. Lisa pushed her food around her plate, lost in thought. I keep thinking about Mom. She would have seen through Victor immediately, wouldn't she? I smiled, remembering Dorothy's sharp instincts. Your mother had this way of asking innocent questions that made liars squirm. She would have had Victor's number within a week. Like what kind of questions? She'd ask about his office, want to visit his workplace, ask to meet his colleagues. Simple stuff that honest people love talking about and dishonest people make excuses to avoid. Victor never wanted me to visit his office. He said it was too boring, just cubicles and conference rooms, because there probably wasn't much of an office to see. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in memories and might have beens. Dad, can I ask you something personal? Of course, sweetheart. Are you okay? I mean, really, okay. You just lost a lot of money and discovered your son-in-law was a criminal. But you seem, I don't know, calmer than I expected. I considered her question carefully. You know, Lisa, I think I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. How's that possible? For the past 2 years, I've been feeling like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Like I was losing my mind or my business instincts were failing me. Finding out Victor was stealing actually came as a relief. A relief? It meant I wasn't crazy. My instincts were right. When someone you trust is systematically lying to you, part of you knows it even when your mind doesn't want to accept it. Lisa nodded slowly. I felt that too. This constant low-level anxiety that I couldn't explain, like I was always walking on eggshells around Victor trying not to upset him. That's what living with deception does to you. It creates this underlying tension because your subconscious picks up on things your conscious mind dismisses. So what happens now with us? I mean, our relationship, I reached across the table and took her hand. Now we start over. No more secrets, no more manipulation, no more letting other people define how we relate to each other. I owe you such a big apology, Dad. Lisa, you don't owe me anything except honesty going forward. You were manipulated by a professional con artist. That's not your fault, but I said such awful things. I accused you of being controlling when you were just trying to protect me, and I'll probably make mistakes too as we figure this out. The important thing is that we're both committed to rebuilding trust. Over the next few weeks, Lisa threw herself into the divorce proceedings with a determination that reminded me of Dorothy. She hired her own attorney, started therapy to deal with the emotional manipulation, and began the process of untangling her life from Victor's web of lies. The FBI investigation uncovered a massive fraud scheme involving not just Victor but his entire family network. They'd been running variations of the same con for years, targeting successful older men who wanted to help their children's spouses succeed. It's actually a common pattern, Leonard Hayes explained during our final meeting. They identify wealthy fathers-in-law who feel guilty about their success or want to show support for their children's marriages. Then they exploit that generosity through fake investment schemes. How many other families did they hurt? At least 15 that we know of. Total losses around $3.2 million. Your case was actually what broke it open because you had the resources and knowledge to fight back effectively. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was being served, but sadness for all the other families who'd been torn apart by the Caldwell's greed. The final court hearing happened on a cold February morning. Victor appeared in an orange jumpsuit, looking nothing like the confident young man who'd married my daughter 3 years earlier. When the judge sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison, I felt no joy, only a sense of closure. Lisa sat beside me in the courtroom, her divorce finalized the week before. As we walked out into the Chicago winter, she slipped her arm through mine. How do you feel? She asked, like I can breathe again. I said honestly, like I don't have to pretend everything's fine when it's not. Me too. We drove back to my house in comfortable silence, both of us processing the end of a chapter we were ready to close. That evening, as I sat in Dorothy's study reviewing some development contracts, Lisa knocked on the door. Dad, I've been thinking about something. What's that, honey? I want to come work for Riverside Development. Learn the business from the ground up. I looked up from my papers. Surprised? Are you sure? It's hard work, long hours, and I won't give you special treatment just because you're my daughter. She smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. I'm counting on it. I want to earn my place, not have it handed to me. I've had enough of fake success to last a lifetime. When do you want to start? Monday morning. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to have you, sweetheart. Your mother would be so proud. Outside my window, Chicago continued its eternal dance of ambition and consequence. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of that dance instead of just watching from the sidelines. Sometimes the dinosaur wins not by being the biggest or strongest, but by being patient, persistent, and refusing to accept lies as truth. Thanks for listening. Family means protecting the people you love, even when it's hard, even when they don't understand, and even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes that's exactly what love looks like. Trust isn't about never asking questions. It's about getting honest answers when you do. The people who call you controlling for wanting the truth are usually the ones hiding something that would change everything.